Art is a personal way of manifesting one's thoughts, and these thoughts are heavily influenced by the world the artist lives in. Art could, was, and still is one of the best ways for the powerful to pass a message, and the Romans were really, really good at it. One of the things that fascinates me the most about Roman coins is the portraiture, how it evolved through the centuries and how it always reflects in its aesthetics the current state of Roman politics when it was struck. Today, let's go on the coin timeline. Let's start by the Republican period and follow the history of the Roman Empire. See how the portraits on Roman coins change, why they change, and see how it followed the shifting Roman politics. So let's go. Portraits start showing up on Roman coins around the 1st century BC. First, as mint officials started putting portraits of their deceased forefathers as a propaganda move. Starting with Julius Caesar, however, and during the very last years of the Roman Republic, we start seeing the depiction of living Romans. What I have here is the denarius of the Second Triumvirate, dated to 42 BC, struck under Octavian, the future first emperor, and his colleague Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. During Republican times, we see a lot of sculptures showing very old, wrinkled, and aged characters. This style was called veristic, coming from the Latin name veritas, which means truthful. And that's what this style is about, showing how they were as accurately as possible. And for us, this might seem ugly. Why have an artist depict yourself with all your flaws and aged? This had a lot to do with the cultural context of the Republic. A good Roman was an experienced man, a man who served his time, had the wrinkles of experience, and a life well lived. This was the face of a good Roman. So as we get back to our coin here, on the obverse, we see a realistic bust of Lepidus, who was around 49 at the time. I'm adding a drawing to help you visualize the overall coin, but just by looking at the coin itself, you can make out that the skin on his face is starting to look a little bit loose, and his receding hairline is also quite visible. The legends state his titles: Lepidus Pontifex Maximus, Tres Viri Respublicae Constituendae. And on the reverse, we have a youthful bust of Octavian, who was only 22 years old at that time. So we have just the youthful face here. It's absolutely crazy to think how someone just 22 years old had accomplished so much. For the legends, we can read Gaius Caesar Imperator, Tres Viri Respublicae Constituendae, putting him in equal footing with Lepidus. But as the Republic gives way to the Empire, we have another change in imperial portraiture. Here is a statue of Octavian, now turned Augustus, the first Roman emperor. This famous statue of him was actually made when he was much, much older. Yet, here we have a youthful Augustus. The first emperors were never depicted old. The style changed to a more idealized, Greek-inspired standard of beauty, where the emperor had this Apollo-esque image of the sun god that never grew old, was always beautiful and radiant. So let's illustrate this with a denarius of Augustus. Here we have this lovely coin which shows nothing but just the youthful face of the emperor. But by the time this coin was struck, 17 BC, Augustus was already 46 years old. He didn't look like that, that's for sure. This kind of portrait was kept up to his very last issues, and his successors like Tiberius, Caligula, or Claudius also kept this tradition of showing a youthful emperor well into their old age. Things start changing with the reign of Nero, however. Nero's coinage and his sculpture shows this really interesting return to realism in his official image. Nero did not care for the fact he was growing fatter as the years passed. His coinage reflects this gain of weight. His later coins, like this Sestertius, shows a very full face, but it also has traces of that kind of, let's say, grace and flawlessness of the Greco-Roman ideal from the previous coins. So as we can see, he has a very serene expression. His hair is perfectly kept, the laurel crown is perfectly placed on his head. Yet, it's impossible not to notice the fact that, well, he looks fat like a pig. Then, as the 2nd century rolls in, this realistic style with a gentle veneer of Greek idealism settles in. Here's the denarius of Emperor Trajan. Trajan was a very serious and pragmatic man, and his coinage reflects this image. He isn't particularly handsome or attractive in his portraits, but he's also never portrayed old or frail. He's always shown at his best possible light, but also with the little flaws and things that made him Trajan. Even after death, like for example in this denarius of Antoninus Pius, we don't see an old man close to his final days. We see Antoninus at his best, realistically depicted, yes, as a man of certain age, but definitely with a flattering portraiture. His statues also reflect this imagery. He's always depicted as this middle-aged, competent emperor, that reliable guy you can always count on. Then as we move towards the beginning of the 3rd century, the political environment of Rome starts seeing some turmoil. The Severan dynasty establishes itself by force, and we start seeing this authoritarian tone make itself apparent on coins. No other emperor makes more use of this feature than Caracalla. His busts are very serious, very angry, very militaristic. He was said to be instructed by his father to enrich the soldiers and scorn all others. And that's what we see on his coins. He's generally very angry looking. He's always frowning on his sculpture and his coins in this vigilant position. Yes, part of it was due to his very unpleasant personality, but it was mainly to pass a threat to any potential usurpers in these dangerous times and to reassure his troops he was the strong man they needed to keep stability. The empire was on a dangerous path. After the Severan dynasty died off or was killed off, we see a small respite of normality under Gordian III before the empire plunges into the crisis of the 3rd century. Poor little Gordian tried establishing a sense of normalcy and re-establishment of the Principate, as we can see in his denarius. He was just a young boy when he ascended to the purple, but as we can see on his denarius, this looks like Princeps, a good emperor of old, a dignified young man without the treacherous face of Caracalla or the serious portrait of Trajan. His coinage was mostly very benign, showing he was once again the first among equals. But alas, it was not to be. Poor little Gordian would soon find a violent end, and the empire would plunge into chaos. The middle of the 3rd century was a time of internal conflicts, and power was always changing hands between competing generals. The situation began to stabilize with Aurelian as he reunified the empire. Look at his coin, a very significant change from the iconography we saw in the earlier coins from the beginning of the century. First, realism is completely out of the equation. The process of making coins with the emperor's image required first that this emperor actually had busts of him sculpted and one brought to the mint so the engravers could copy it. In a sense, realism required stability. The problem is, well, emperors were dying so often that this didn't even have time to happen. So realism wasn't in the cards anymore, but we see some similarities to the busts attributed to Aurelian and when we compare it against the coin. Notice the cropped haircut and beard, typical of the military. Also, no more togas, senatorial attire, first among equals. No, this was a time of generals and of strongmen. Aurelian is clearly depicted with his battle cuirass, But this is what the Roman people wanted, so he gave it to them in the imagery, stability, and for once an emperor who actually took power and sustained it, by force if necessary. But it was with Diocletian and his established tetrarchy that the empire would finally find a ruler that would keep himself in power. Diocletian was a reformer, and among his reforms was a new monetary standard, new coins, and a new way of seeing the emperor. The statue of the Tetrarchs, originally from Constantinople and now in Venice after Venetian crusaders stole it in the sack of Constantinople, illustrates very well this new way of depicting imperial power. This time period is called the dominant, coming from the word dominus, lord. The emperor wasn't supposed to be a man anymore. He was supposed to be a powerful entity above everyone. That is why on the statue and on the coins of the Tetrarchs, each of these men is indistinguishable from one another. This bust of Diocletian we see here is more an icon than a depiction of a man. The only way of distinguishing coins struck for one emperor or the other in this group of four is on very subtle differences on the busts, but mainly by the legends, which in this case states we are looking at Diocletian. And as we finally move to the Constantinian dynasty, and from that point to the end of the empire, coinage depicts the emperor basically as an absolute monarch, which they were by that time. On the Palatine museums in Rome, there are the remains of this absolutely enormous statue of Constantine, which would be unthinkable years prior. Constantine and his sons were more akin to gods on earth than special people among fellow men. And on this coin of Constantine's son, Constantius II, we have it even clearer. Now, the laurel wreath, symbol of emperors for so long, is replaced by the jeweled diadem, a symbol of royalty, which would evolve into medieval crowns. Later coins would also adopt among the titles of the emperor the letters DN for Dominus Noster, our Lord. And in case the situation was not clear enough, another stylistic touch to this coin was added. Constantius is seen holding the globe, representing the whole world in his hand, a completely absolutist portrait. Assembling a Roman imperial collection is a wonderful tour through the evolution of art on the Roman Empire throughout the centuries. Do you have a favorite period of Roman coinage? Let us know in the comment section down below. And if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing so we can keep bringing videos to YouTube. I hope you all enjoyed it, happy collecting, and I'll see you soon.